Right, good evening, everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me. Send me a message if you can't, or if at any point you can't see the slides that I'm sharing with you. So I'm Helen Money. Hopefully you're all here for the sports nutrition talk, Introduction to Sports Nutrition. Really pleased to see so many of you have logged in to listen and watch. If you have any team members that haven't been able to join us tonight, there is another talk, exactly the same talk, just run by Frances, the other nutritionist. Frances and I both do the nutrition for the Blues teams. She's running exactly the same talk tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. If no one can still make that talk, these are also recorded and they will be available to you if you want to watch them on recording. Right, so let's get started. I'm going to share my screen with you. Hold on 1 second, I shall be sharing that in a minute. Right, hopefully you can all see this. As I say, drop me a message if you can't, or perhaps take your speaker off and let me know in case I don't notice in the chat. So, I say, I'm Helen Money and this is the Introduction to Sports Nutrition talk. So what are we going to be covering? We're going to be talking about why nutrition is so important. We're then going to talk about when nutrition is important, how you make energy, how you make strength, which are obviously the basis of sports nutrition, how much to eat. We're going to cover hydration, we're going to touch on alcohol. We're also going to talk about the immune system. There will be time at the end for questions. So if while I'm going through you have any questions, if you would like to drop those in the chat, I can work my way through those at the end and answer as many as I can. But do bear in mind that this is a general sports nutrition talk, and you will all be getting a team specific talk during which we'll make all this information much more relevant to you, much more relevant to your sport, to your training and to your competition. Okay, so let's start with the question, why is nutrition so important? And if you can just think about that for a few seconds. And I'd suggest that the answer is basically what we eat affects absolutely everything we do, how we look, how we perform, and everything we do. So nutrition is the base for everything. It affects our well-being and performance and our physical and mental well-being. And with sports nutrition and sports, as I know all of you will train a lot, and there is always a focus on how important training is to get better at one sport and to do well in competition. What Frances and I would like to suggest to you is that to get the most out of that training, all that hard work that you put into training, to get the most out of it, you need to be eating right around every day and then around that training. And on average, I'd say most of you train about 7 times a week, some about 2 or 3 times a week, some of you as much as 14 times a week. However, on average, you're probably all eating about 35 times a week. So every time you eat, that's an opportunity to get more out of your training, to be preparing for it so you can work as hard as you possibly can in that session, then recovering from it, ready for the next session, and also your academic studies as well. This is another reason. That is one of the other reasons that nutrition talks are put on for the sports teams. We have to remember that you're not normal population. It's important to bear in mind you're studying at one of the highest levels in the world. You're studying at Oxford University. Expectations of your studies your academic expectations of you are high, very high, and you need to bear that in mind. Plus, you're either a blues athlete or an athlete that is training regularly and hopefully later in the year competing. And we know those people, we know athletes also have different nutritional demands to normal population. And if we put that together, that makes you that person in the middle. You've got a lot of requirements from your nutrition. You're performing to a high level in different areas. That's absolutely fine. You can totally achieve that. But to make sure that none of those balls are dropped, that you need to make sure that you're on top of your nutrition, eating well to support performance and also your well-being. Right. So when is nutrition important? Always. I'm a nutritionist. I'm definitely going to say that your nutrition is always important. But with sports nutrition, what we're going to talk about a bit more is eating around training and competition. We'd really encourage you to make sure that all training sessions are fueled and recovered. And we're going to go into more detail about how you do that a bit later on. And again, I want to emphasize that eating right around training is what will mean that you'll get the most you possibly can out of training. The 5 years that Francis and I have been working with the Blues nutrition teams at Oxford University, the focus is very much on students asking us, athletes asking us, what should I be eating around competition? We'd really, really like to emphasize what's going to make you perform the best in competition is getting the most out of every training session. Therefore, if you're eating right around your training, you can work as hard as you possibly can, and that's what's going to make you perform best in competition. Obviously, we want to get your competition diet right as well, but don't just think, oh, it's only another training session, it doesn't matter what I eat. We also know how you eat around training impacts your risk of injury. But also, I know this is a slightly different year this year because there isn't as much competition, but thinking for the future as well, this is also, your training sessions are also an opportunity to practice your competition nutrition. You never want to go into a competition not having trialed what you're going to eat and drink. That's very likely to end in disaster. So see your training sessions as also training your gut ready for competition. And obviously, as you're all aware, that nutrition is also important in competition. So let's get on some more of the details. As I say, we're going to keep this on quite a basic level, looking at how you make energy and how you make strength. And we can go into more detail in your team talks. So how you make energy. I've got two different graphs to go through on this. The first one I'm going to just touch on really quickly, then the second one we're going to spend more time on. So the three energy is made differently depending on how fast you need it and how long you need it for. So what this graph shows us is the three energy pathways. The first line that is sort of greeny color shows how we make energy for the first few seconds. What's the most important energy system for that explosive type sport? So when you get going or if you're jumping, and that's called the phosphate creatine pathway. We then, so no at that point there's no glucose or glycogen involved and there's no oxygen. But this yellow line, which starts building up, making energy and building up as the second pathway, starts bringing glucose and glycogen in, and we get glucose and glycogen from eating carbohydrate. And that pathway, so there's a glucose and glycogen being brought in, but still no oxygen. Then the red line is what actually provides us with longer energy for a longer period of time and becomes more important around the sort of 7-8 minute mark. So the main points to make about this graph is we make energy differently depending how long we need it for and how fast we need it for. For the first 10 seconds of that phosphate creatine pathway, what I would like to emphasize is that we do have creatine in the body, but through diet, where we get it is from in animal flesh. So while we're very much in these talks promoting food first, that you get what you need through a good solid diet, it may be that vegans that do a lot of explosive sports, so maybe sprinters, shot putters, fencers, so a lot of that type of explosive type sport may need to supplement with creatine. Right, this graph I'm going to spend a bit longer on because it shows us there's lots more to discuss here. So what each of these bars represent is how we make energy, how we make ATP, which is our end energy unit, depending on what our activity is and how fast we need that. So the bar furthest to the left, looking at it, the left, shows how we make energy at rest, then at light exercise, then high intensity sprint type exercise, so that more of that explosive exercise, and then high intensity endurance, so that's more longer running, longer cycling, longer swimming. So while your sport might actually be more of a sprint sport, do bear in mind that normally training sessions last 1 to 3 hours. So while your sport might just be a 10-second sport, for example, in competition, the majority of the teams do their training is more like an endurance sport. So the things to note about this graph: blue is protein, red is fat, green is glucose and glycogen, so deriving from carbohydrate. So the first thing to note is we don't really want to be using protein to make energy. A little bit is involved, but where we can, we want to keep our protein for keeping our muscles strong and for reproducing cells in the body. Fat differs depending on how the type of activity, but what's the main thing to focus on is this green bar, how our carbohydrate, so glucose and glycogen requirements alter depending on how active we are. So what we need to bear in mind here is that I know every time you open a magazine, open your computer, open a newspaper, there might be an article saying carbohydrates are bad for you or reduce the amount of carbohydrate you eat. But going back to that Venn diagram I showed you, you're not normal population. The majority of people in the UK are quite sedentary. So they're spending most of their time making energy or ATP energy in the way these first two bars show. So you know what, they don't need an awful lot of carbohydrate. But once you start exercising and want to train as hard as you can, glucose and glycogen becomes really, really important. So I'm going to concentrate on those the two bars to the other side. So as I'm sure you're all aware, you can make energy just from protein and fat. Carbohydrate is not an essential nutrient, whereas protein and fat is, but you're going to train a whole lot better and feel a whole lot better if you do have carbohydrates in your diet. So having sufficient carbohydrates will glucose and glycogen availability when you train means that you will be able to make ATP as shown in these bars. And that means it will be delivered to you in the fastest possible way. And if energy is being delivered to you in the fastest possible way, it means that you can train harder. And that's exactly what we want. We do not want energy supply being what causes fatigue in your training. So you need to have made sure that that's available before each training session. Therefore, you will have the most energy you can, and that will be feeding into your muscles to make at a faster rate than if that glucose and glycogen isn't available. So what happens if it's not available? What happens if you haven't eaten as much glucose, don't have as much glucose and glycogen availability in a training session? So we covered that green bar up, and we forced the body just to make energy from fat and protein. It might be that you sometimes do that because it forces the body to burn more fat. And there might be times in the year or certain training sessions where you are doing that deliberately because you want to burn fat. It might be to do with different periodization in your training. It could be because you've got to lose some fat at short notice, before a competition. But the majority of your training should not be that. And if you are doing that, if you are taking the glucose and glycogen out and forcing your body to just use fat, as I said, you're not going to have that energy delivered fast. I strongly recommend that this is a joint decision to train like this between you and your coach. So your coach knows not to push you as hard because you won't be able to do it. And they know that that's what you're doing. But we also know training low compromises the immune system. And we always want our immune system to be as strong as possible, but I would say certainly this year more than ever, it's really important that our immune system is ready to fight any infections. We also know training low increases the risk of injury, both long term and short term. So in the short term, you're breaking down muscle and potentially not repairing it properly, and it can increase risk of short-term injury, but also it leaves markings on the muscles, which again over the long term can increase risk of injury. So in summary, what I'm saying there is that it's important you know how much carbohydrate that you need before a training session or potentially during a training session, so you can get the most out of that session. So how much is that? And this is where, so this guidance is really very general. This is guidance provided by the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, on how much carbohydrate an athlete should have depending on how much they train, how often they train. This is exactly where in your team specific talks we're going into more detail. But the general guidance is, you can see in this table here, I'm going to concentrate on that endurance 1 to 3 hours because that's generally what most people are doing. So I just want to give you an example here of how much carbohydrate that is. So if we look at the line endurance 1 to 3 hours activity, the guidance by the IOC is 6 to 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight a day. So let me give you an example. For someone, I've chosen someone that weighs 70 kilograms. You would then so for someone training at the moment where we are for most people's seasons, I would say if you're training 1 to 2 hours, the guidance will be around 7 grams. So if we times 70 by 7, that equates to 490 grams of carbohydrate. So that's the recommended amount for someone training. I would recommend for someone training 1 to 2 hours a day, at a reasonable intensity, 490 grams. We do have tables at the end of this presentation showing carbohydrate content, but I'll just tell you that that equates to 490 grams of carbohydrate, which is equivalent to 5 full plates of pasta. Definitely not recommending that you eat 5 full plates of pasta, certainly not all in one go, and certainly not all your carbohydrates from one food source. But it gives you an indication of how much carbohydrate, if you're training regularly at a reasonable intensity, you need to fuel yourself properly. But as I say, that should be distributed through the day, and we'll talk about that more in a second. But that is a challenge. That's what I'm saying, that is a challenge. But if you're just having a low intensity day, just some very light training, you might go down as low as 3 grams per kilogram of body weight, which goes down to 210 grams if you're 70 kilograms. Or on the say the ultra endurance athletes or the more endurance athletes, some days they will be going up as high as 10 to 12 grams per kilogram of body weight. So that's your general guidance on how much carbohydrate you should be eating a day. There's guidance for how much to have during competition as well, and that varies on competition training. That varies depending how long the session is. If you're training for less than 60 minutes or you're competing for less than 60 minutes, you should certainly be able to have eaten enough beforehand to not need to take on any carbohydrate during. However, if you were to be training in the morning and you haven't had breakfast, it might be that at the beginning of the session you do need to take on some full sugar squash or potentially an energy drink, although I would recommend that you did eat or drink before morning training sessions. So an average full glycogen store lasts about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, depending on intensity of exercise. So as your training sessions get longer, what you've eaten beforehand will not be enough to last the whole of the duration of the training session or the competition. So it becomes important to actually take on carbohydrate during. And the guidance is for 1 to 2 hours training, you have 30 grams an hour of carbohydrate, 2 to 3 hours, 60 grams of carbohydrate. If you're training or competing for over 3 hours, the guidance is 90 grams an hour. However, obviously we need that carbohydrate to be transported from the blood to the muscles, and transporters only have a capacity of transporting 60 grams of glucose and 30 grams of fructose an hour. So for those that train longer or compete for longer lengths, you need to make sure that the carbohydrates you're taking on, if you're going up to 90 grams, are a mixture of glucose and fructose. We're going to come on to talk about recovery, but it's also really important that, so we've talked about having carbohydrate before training to fuel you for that training, and the possibility that you might need carbohydrate during training. But you also, carbohydrate after training is important as well. And the guidance is, if you're training within 24 hours, to have 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight with your recovery as soon as possible after training. The reason being that after you've exercised, after we've exercised, we metabolize at a faster rate. We also can transport more carbohydrate. We normally just have the transporters are on the cytoplasm within the muscle. When we've been exercising, because the body's wants to transport more carbohydrate, we increase the number of transporters we have, and also they translocate to the cell surface. And then for the 2 hours after training, they migrate back and some disappear. So we have this window of opportunity after training to actually prepare ourselves for the next training session. So if you're training within 24 hours, this is really important. It's fine if you're not training for another couple of days. The carbohydrate after training is not so important, because you'll have a couple of days to be eating normally and refill your glycogen store. But it's those people that are training within 24 hours, and certainly some of you I know train twice a day, and that's where it's really, really important. At this point, you want to go fast release carbohydrate. So that really is things like the pure sugars, honey, for example, the fast release carbohydrates, because you want to make the most of that window where you're going to put that straight into storage rather than causing high blood sugar levels. The rest of the time, so away from training, optimally you're having slow release carbohydrates, so things more like the whole grain, sweet potato, fruit, those type of things. But around training, that's when we go to fast release. So with energy creation, I know I've talked a lot about carbohydrates, and carbohydrates are important, and that's what we talk a lot about in sports nutrition. But to make the carbohydrates work, lots needs to happen. You need to eat them. The reactions we need that carbohydrate taken out of the food, repackaged and made into ATP. And that's where your base diet becomes really, really important, because you could eat as much carbohydrate as you want, but unless you've got the vitamins and minerals available that can actually repackage that carbohydrate as ATP, it's not going to be as effective. So essential, the nutrients most important for energy creation are B vitamins, zinc, magnesium, iron, and chromium. Again, at the end of this presentation, there are lists of where you can which foods are high in these nutrients. But as a rough guide, 4 foods, I think I've got 4. I might have fish on the end there as well, so my thing's covered up. So 4, but also 5 foods that are high in these nutrients are whole grains, nuts, seeds, green leafy vegetables, and fish. So what I would be saying to you is this is where your base diet is really, really important. Optimally, you're getting in your meals, in your snacks, away from training, there's whole grains, nuts, seeds, green leafy vegetables, and fish going in a few times a week. And then when you put the carbs in, they'll actually be able to do their job. So that's how to make energy. We're now going on to how to make strength. Now, I'm sure most of you are aware you make strength by using your muscles and eating protein. And I know to a lot of you that would be really obvious, but there's something that I see quite commonly, not necessarily within the athletes at Oxford University, but I see people training and training really hard. They're not having protein at the right time. So they've done what I see as a really, really hard bit of ripping their muscles, because that's what we do when we train. So they've done all the muscle ripping, but then don't have protein or don't have enough protein at the right time to mend those muscles and mend them stronger and make themselves stronger. The second thing that I see is that I see teenage boys wandering around drinking protein shakes that have very clearly never ever seen a gym in their life, and they suddenly think they're going to get ripped just by drinking the protein shake. But it's not. It's a mixture of the two. You need to rip your muscles, then you need to put the protein in, and a little bit of carbohydrate. The timing, if you're specifically doing muscle hypertrophy, so you're in a phase where you're actually want to be making your muscles stronger and bigger and stronger, the amount and timing of protein intake is important. The guidance for muscle hypertrophy is 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight a day. 1.6 is ample, but if that is your main focus, so maybe you're a strength athlete and your main focus is hypertrophy, you might go up to 2.2 grams, but 1.6 for muscle hypertrophy is sufficient. Then that needs to be divided at the right times, so that that's being taken up by the muscles optimally to mend, heal them, make them stronger. So it's really important to have protein immediately after training. Again, when metabolizing faster, that's when the muscles want to take protein up. The guidance is 20 to 50 grams of protein immediately after training. So you'll be looking to have that protein as possible as soon as you can after training or competition. So that generally means taking it with you. It doesn't mean finishing a training session, taking 20 minutes to get home, thinking, oh, I'll have a shower, another 10, 20 minutes, an hour later thinking, oh, I should have something to eat. Because don't forget, this is, after you've eaten, it's still going to take 20 minutes, half an hour to get into your blood. So optimally, you are taking recovery to your training sessions with you. If you're not, you go straight home and before showering, have your recovery, and we'll come on to examples of that in a second. So where the guidance is 20 to 50 grams, the graph is very steep, from not having on muscle hypertrophy and recovery, from not having any protein. The line on the graph is very sharp up until 20 grams. It then is really, really quite flat, and there's very, very little difference between 40 and 50 grams, what it will do for muscle hypertrophy. So the general guidance is 20 grams, and that's sufficient after training. If you've done something like a long bike, say a 4 or 5 hour bike, I would go up nearer to about 30, 40 grams. So examples of what 20 grams of protein are, again, there's some pictures at the end of the presentation. It would be things like a pint of milk, a 200 grams of 0% Greek yogurt. You could also use 50 grams of chicken. The reason I'm emphasizing milk and yogurt is that whey protein is the fastest release protein, and that is what research is currently showing is the most optimal to have immediately after, and that's why most protein recovery shakes are whey. If you're vegan, there are some other options available. It is more challenging for vegans to have 20 grams of protein immediately after training, unless they're having a protein shake. So while I've emphasized things like milk and yogurt being optimal, and are as effective as a whey protein shake after training, obviously they're not suitable for vegans. So most people would not want to eat a tin of beans after immediately after training, or some tofu. It might be that you are okay with that, but generally that's not what most people after a really hard training session are going to feel like eating immediately. So it might be that vegans do have to think about using a vegan protein shake just for convenience at that point immediately after training. What you're looking for there is a vegan protein shake that is mixed protein, so not just one, not just rice, not just hemp. You're looking for a combination so that you get all the amino acids that make a protein. So that's protein immediately after training. So that's a really important time. You do your training, you have some protein, you mend and heal your muscles, and you strengthen them. But then if you're in muscle hypertrophy, what you want to do is make sure that you spend more time in muscle synthesis than you are in muscle breakdown. And that means eating protein little and often through the day. So the guidance is to actually divide that protein intake over 5 meals or snacks during the day. So something such as protein with 3 meals, so each of your meals to include protein, some protein immediately after training, as we've discussed, and then some protein before you go to bed.
Helen, hello, hi. Sorry, I'm Jan. Thank you so much. Quick question, because you mentioned milk. I have read that it's very important to have fat together with the protein for the protein to be absorbed. Is that still true? Because, you know, obviously narratives change every couple of years when it comes to nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
So low fat milk is good. Or sorry, I think there's a delay. Is low fat milk as good as high fat milk, or, you know, this kind of stuff?
So with you're correct, we do need fat for muscle synthesis, but there would be, as long as you're having a healthy balanced diet, there will be fat available. There'll be fat to sufficient fat to make muscle through your general diet, and the timing of that does not necessarily have to be immediately after training, but certainly with your meals there should be fat, so cooking with olive oil, maybe having some avocado, that type of thing. What we do need is a little bit of carbohydrate for the protein to be utilized and turned into muscle. But if we're using something like milk has lactose in it, so there is a small amount of carbohydrate in that. The reason we go low, my recommendations are for low fat around training. So if I was for milk and yogurt around, just immediately around training, the guidance is to go low fat. Beforehand, you want to go low fat because you don't want to be causing gut distress, and having too much fat in your stomach and your gut is likely to make you feel sick. And then immediately after, fat actually slows the absorption and the release of both protein and carbohydrates. So immediately around training, you go low fat, but then make sure you get ample fat in the rest of your diet around the day. Where the research shows high fat, not high fat, full fat milk would be slightly more optimal is if you're having it before you go to bed, because that's exactly what we want before we go to bed. Casein is the optimal type of protein there, which again is in milk. But we want, we have that's recommended before you go to bed, because you're going to fast for, hopefully be asleep for 8 hours, but 6 to 8 to 9 hours. And your muscles, while we sleep, that's when your muscles are, again, mending. So we optimally go slow release through the night. So that's absorbing through the night. And that's when you would go, if we're being really optimal, that's when you go whole milk. Has that answered your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. So what I was talking about on that previous slide was if you're actually in a phase of muscle hypertrophy, so you're particularly looking to make your grow your and strengthen your muscles. But that isn't the phase for most athletes. Will have that phase in their training at some point during the year, but the majority of their year will actually be more building up endurance and keeping the muscle strong, so not losing strength, but building aerobic capacity becomes more important. So this table here shows you for steady state, not steady, maintaining muscles, the protein requirements are slightly lower, and that enables you to spend more of your calories on the carbohydrates. So let's just take an endurance athlete training daily, moderate intensity. 1.2 grams of protein is enough per kilogram of body weight a day is sufficient to keep their muscle strength. So again, calculating that for our person that weighs 70 kilograms, if we would do 70 kilograms times 1.2, that comes out to 84 grams of protein, which is equivalent to 200 grams of chicken. So again, I'm not recommending that you do it all with one food source, but I just want to give you an example through one food source. So that's, I say, 200 grams of cooked chicken. If you are going up to 1.6 grams per kilogram body weight, that's 112 grams of protein, which would be equivalent to 250 grams of protein. So an average chicken breast is 100 grams. So it's still only 2.5 chicken breasts a day. So the point that I'm making here, would like to make here, is that if you're following a healthy, balanced diet by having 3 meals a day, palm-sized portion of protein with each meal, you're then adding your recovery protein in, and potentially some protein before bed, some snacks such as yogurt or milk, you've ticked that protein box quite easily. It's not that difficult to achieve. But if we go back to the carbohydrates that I was recommending, that is difficult to achieve. And I just wanted to make that comparison. Right, now we're coming on to how much to eat. And obviously that really, really depends on how active you are. So I'm sure many of you actually wear some sort of calorie counter, heart rate monitor, or something, or an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or something that actually tells you how many calories you're burning in a day. I know they're not exact, but they're generally ballpark right. And what I really want to do is, if you do wear something like that, actually take notice of it. That is telling you that you need to eat on a certain day with a certain amount of training. That's how much you need to eat. Knowing how many calories you're going to burn in advance is really important, because then you can put the food in beforehand, use it in your training session to work as hard as you possibly can, rather than running on empty all day, going into a training session, not having eaten enough, then coming out of that training session and being so ridiculously hungry, eating absolutely everything in sight. You're going to then be playing constant catch up and not putting the calories, the nutrients, the energy in at the time they're going to be optimal. So for those that don't wear any type of calorie counter, this is how you work out how much energy you need in a day. You start with basal metabolic rate here, and these are the formulas that you can go away enough time and calculate for yourself. So basal metabolic rate is the amount of energy you need with absolutely no movement whatsoever. It's the amount of energy that your organs need to function. And often, I know again it sounds a bit obvious, but people don't always take that into consideration. Even if you're not moving, your heart, it takes energy for your heart to beat, energy for your liver to do its job. And that's our basal metabolic rate. So you calculate that to begin with, and then you add on activity. So general guidance is to times your basal metabolic, not general, the guidance is to times your basal metabolic rate by 1.2 for light activity. So if you're having a sedentary day, that would be your calorie requirements and what you base the rest of your calculations off. So generally what I found with Oxford University students, because you're moving around quite a bit, you cycle around, you walk between lectures, I tend to find that times in that by basal metabolic rate by 1.3 is more appropriate. However, we're not in normal times at the moment, and if you're someone that is just having all Zoom lectures the whole day and you're not moved around Oxford much, times in your basal metabolic rate by 1.2 will be sufficient. Then this is where it becomes even more subjective. We then need to add on how much energy you're using in a training session or competition. So we use that basal metabolic rate times 1.2 for your base, then we add your training on. And this is where I can't be that specific in this talk, because there's too many sports here with too many different types of training sessions and competitions. But this is exactly where we can look at this much more closely in your team specific talks. As I say, it is important to know how much energy you need so you can put it in at the right time. And I've approached this very much by how much are you going, what's your calorie expenditure in a day? Let's put enough food on top into you to meet that. An alternative way of looking at this is available energy. So that turns it upside down. You look at how much you've eaten in a day, then you take off how much energy you've used exercising and in movement, and does that leave enough, and does that leave an amount that is equal to your basal metabolic rate? So have you left enough energy to enable your body to function properly? And if you haven't, a day here, day there, that's fine, because it'll average out over time. But if you're constantly low in available energy, that is going to have consequences. The bit that you're probably most focused on is that it's going to create poor performance, both in your sport and also academically. So not enough available energy equals poor performance. You also hugely increase your risk of injury, Also, if you are injured, you're going to recover from that injury much slower because there's not enough energy for the body to be able to use to heal you. You're also likely, a sign is things like stress fractures. If you are constantly low in available energy, one of the first warning signs, one of the warning signs is stress fractures. But these tend to only happen with the sports that have more impact. So something like swimming, you're less likely to see this in compared to something like running. It's going to take longer in the sport like swimming to show up. It might be that you've noticed that you've got reduced muscle build. So if you've got low available energy, you're not going to build muscles. Hypertrophy is not going to be as successful. And again, it compromises the immune system. So I'm not sure, hopefully you've all heard of RED-S, that's the new name for it. It used to also be called female triad and the male triad, but it's now called RED-S. And this is the term for athletes that are in constant, have constant low available energy, and some of the consequences we see off the back of that. With females, we get quite a loud shout that something's wrong if you have disturbed menstrual cycles or no period at all. So if you're not having a period, it is really important that you look, am I eating enough? And not having a period can certainly have long-term consequences around fertility and health. So that's really, really important. And we also see low bone density. But again, that's going to take a bit longer to show up. With males, it's a hard, not having enough sufficient energy is a bit harder to detect. As I say, it might be that you notice your muscles are not repairing or growing at the speed that you would expect them to, at the rate you would expect them to. But it's also that you would have low testosterone levels. You can be testosterone tested, but other signs of that would be things like not having to shave as often as you used to, or if you don't have to shave very regularly, it's something that potentially could be a warning sign that there isn't enough available energy. Just touching on a couple of the micronutrients, and we just want to highlight these, and again, for gender specific talks, we can talk about these more in the team talks. But female athletes, I'd really like to highlight iron. It's really hard to get enough iron into a female's diet anyway, because the requirements are almost double that of a man, of a male. But then also athletes have a slightly higher iron requirement. There isn't a set figure of how much more you need. We just know the research shows that athletes need more iron than non-active people. And if we think about iron, what it does is transporting oxygen around the body, which is vital to obviously energy creation over a couple of minutes, and will be impacting your performance as well as your well-being. So good sources of red meat, but I know there's a decline in the amount of red meat eaten by people more recently. So other good sources include beans, pulses, green leafy vegetables and whole grains. Now with the green leafy vegetables, so often people say to me, oh, that's fine, I eat spinach. And it turns out that what they mean by the green leaf vegetables is they might have 3 leaves of spinach in their sandwich or something, or a few leaves on the side of their dinner. To get your iron requirement just from spinach, it's 3 of those full bags a day. It's a lot. So while that will contribute, you can't just rely on that. You need to be looking at getting red meat, beans, pulses, whole grains, nuts, seeds, those type of things into your diet as well. Calcium, really important. Best source of calcium is dairy and fish with edible bones, such as sardines. If you are vegan, I'd recommend that if you're using dairy alternatives, make sure they're calcium fortified. If you're not, it might be that you need to look into a calcium supplement. Men, the nutrient you need to be most aware of is zinc. Zinc is needed for every new cell that we make. You need more zinc than females need. Good sources of zinc are oysters. Oysters are a really good source of zinc. However, despite being Oxford University students, I still don't think that you're eating oysters that regularly. So therefore, other good sources are shellfish in general, red meat, and then pumpkin seeds as well. And again, there's sources, tables showing sources at the end. Right, so hopefully what I've explained there is how to make strength, how to make energy, how to make strength, how much to eat, and encourage you to think about that at the beginning of the day or prior to the day and planned it rather than always playing catch up. Now, look, let's talk about hydration. And I actually need some water myself, so let me just have a bit of hydration. I've been talking a lot. Hydration, this is really important not to overlook in your sports performance. So let's first of all talk about what we see and when we see signs of dehydration, how it affects our performance, and then we'll talk about how to calculate how much water or fluids that you need. So why hydration is really important is that we start seeing a significant difference in concentration levels at as little as 2% dehydration. That's not much. Obviously, it depends on your body size, but it's only about 700-800 milliliters, not enough of water a day. So that actually can happen without you realizing it. It's really not much at all. So if we think about a significant difference in concentration at 2% dehydration levels, how many of you out there do a sport that requires some level of concentration? The majority of sports do. There's some that it's more important in, and I'd say things like fencing and boxing and polo, for example. You have to be pretty switched on, and many team sports as well, making fast decisions. So concentration is really important. If we move on from concentration, we then start seeing a declines in performance if we're dehydrated. One of the most famous studies for looking at this is a cycling study. It's easier to do hydration studies on things like cycling because they can catch the sweat off people to do all the calculations on, rather than someone that's running, which obviously makes it a bit harder, or playing a sport. So this particular study showed at 5% dehydration, which again can quite easily happen if you're training a couple of hours a day. 5% dehydration, at 5% dehydration, there was a 30% underperformance. Okay, so as these cyclists, they could cycle for 30% less. They voluntarily stopped at 30% less than the people that were fully hydrated. So I hope I've explained that properly. So all the mathematicians out there will tell me that I can't just switch it upside down like this, and I know it's more complicated than this, but I would say to you that if 5% dehydration equates to 30% underperformance, how much extra training do you have to do to improve your performance by 30%? Quite a lot. Whereas all you need to do potentially is just drink an extra 800 milliliters, a litre of water. That is how it impacts your performance. So the guidance of how much guidance on hydration is one of the most difficult things in nutrition, actually, because it's affected by so many things. First of all, everybody sweats at a different rate. everyone sweats differently. They lose different amounts of electrolytes in their sweat. Some people are salty sweaters, some people are not. Then on top of that, the weather obviously makes a difference, the humidity level makes a difference, and also our clothing makes a difference. So there's lots of different factors. So the general guidance is that we require a litre of water a day for our general well-being, then a litre per hour of exercise. However, that can go up significantly, and what you're ideally looking to do is match your sweat loss with fluid intake so that you don't become dehydrated. So there's a couple of ways to monitor your hydration level. The easiest way is just to look at the colour of your pee. Ideally, apart from very first thing in the morning and just maybe just after training, it should be virtually clear. So you're aiming to keep your urine a near clear colour rather than being a deeper yellow colour. If you take a B2 supplement, it might be you have bright fluorescent urine, because if you take B2, that's the colour of it. It's a water-soluble vitamin, and if you don't need that B2, it just flushes straight through you, and you do see that. But generally, you should be going for near clear urine the whole time. If you don't have, it means you need to drink more fluid. To work out how much you should be drinking in food you should be drinking during a training session or competition, the guidance is that you weigh yourself beforehand, you weigh yourself afterwards, and if you've drunk the right amount of water, you should be the same weight, or right amount of fluid, you should be the same weight. If you're a kilogram less, it means that you've drunk a litre, not enough water during that training session. So it might be that you dehydrate slightly, but you're looking for that to be less than 2% and certainly much less than 5% dehydration. Right, so that's hydration. It's really going to quickly touch on alcohol. So most of the studies around alcohol focus more on recovery and what happens if there's alcohol in the system after a training session or competition. What does that mean for recovery? And less research showing what it does for actual performance. But what I would suggest to you is that you're not, well, what I would say to you, not suggest, I would say to you, if you're not recovering properly from training sessions, that's going to impact your performance in your training session, your next training session. So what are we looking for in recovery? We're looking to mend and strengthen muscles. We're looking to refill glycogen stores ready for the next training session, and of course your studies, and you're looking to rehydrate. So let's look at what alcohol does to the body. We know alcohol impairs protein metabolism, it dehydrates, and it's also inflammatory. So it's going to cause inflammation in the body, which is also going to impact on muscle recovery. So having alcohol after training or after competition will have an impact on your recovery. I know in some sports it is traditional to go for a drink afterwards. What I would say is bear in mind what time of year you're doing that, whether it's around competition time and how much you're drinking. So there is a dose response here. So one glass isn't going to have that much, or pint isn't going to have that much of an impact. Several certainly will. But if you are going to have a drink after training or a competition, I strongly urge you to make sure you've done your nutrition recovery first. So make sure you've taken your nutrition recovery with you, either your pint of milk or your yogurt or your sports recovery drink, or a packed some pasta and some chicken or something. Have that before you drink. Right, and then how am I doing for time? I'm just going to, not very well. I'm going to have to speed up. The immune system. Obviously, your immune system is really important. And we're focused particularly on this because of COVID this year. So what we do know is that athletes are particularly susceptible to chest infections. exercise does cause stress in the body, but if it's recovered properly, that's fine. But we know it does release stress hormones that impact the immune system, and research does show chest infections are more common in athletes. So it is important to make sure you are supporting your immune system. Here are a list of the nutrients that are particularly important for the immune system, essential for the immune system, in fact. And this again goes back to why it's so important that you have a good base diet, that your base diet, your meals are good solid meals with that contain carbohydrate, protein, and lots of vegetables or salad to give you these nutrients. I just want to point out a few of these in relation to COVID, what the research coming. So while we knew this about the immune system anyway, now that COVID has been around for longer, we're actually starting to see some nutritional research coming out on COVID specific, rather than the advice we just had on viruses. So certainly vitamins A, C, E, selenium and zinc are particularly important because they're influential in preventing a cell hosting a virus. We also know vitamin D is potentially particularly important because it is influential on controlling inflammation in the lungs, and we also know it protects against pathogens in the respiratory system, and gut bacteria as well we know is important in the inflammatory pathways. So here I'm just emphasizing, and hopefully I have through here as well, that while in sports nutrition we talk a lot about the proteins, the carbs, and how carbohydrates are important for energy, how protein is important for strength. Your base diet and making sure that you're having 3 solid meals that have carbohydrate, protein and vegetables in them are really, really important to make all the sports nutrition work and to support your well-being. So in summary, what I would like to say is that it's the messages that I've been trying to get across tonight are it's important that you have sufficient calorie intake for both your training and your well-being. You consume carbohydrates before and during training and competition for energy. You then should have a recovery meal or snack as soon as possible after training of 20 grams of protein, and if you're training again within the next 24 hours, 0.8 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. For muscle hypertrophy, you need to make sure you're spending more time in muscle synthesis than muscle breakdown, and 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day, but distribute that through the day, and that dehydration is detrimental to performance. And as I say, at the end here of this presentation, there's lots more information if you want to go back and have a look at this, or we also will be, these slides will be available. Right, I'm going to stop sharing now and come back to me. And I am running over, but I can see there's a couple of questions in the chat, which I'll have a look at. Otherwise, as I say, you will be all getting team specific talks. I unfortunately haven't had enough time, as much time as I hope, for questions at the end, but there will certainly be in your team talks more time for questions. So let me just see what chat is saying. Would you discourage? Right, and these 2 questions, I would discourage fasted training in the morning. I know it is the most challenging, and because obviously it's this balance between not wanting to get up earlier than you have to, and leaving enough time to digest. What I find works really well for people that train early in the morning is a smoothie, because it's liquid, doesn't take long to prepare, and it's not going to be so heavy on your gut. So something like a smoothie of some low-fat milk, a bit of low-fat yogurt, a banana, some berries, or maybe some frozen mango, and a tablespoon of honey would work well immediately for a morning training session. most people would be able to have that about 40 minutes beforehand and still be okay, but there are people that obviously that their gut won't allow that and do have to leave a longer time before training, before they eat. If you're not if you're not eating beforehand, what I would suggest is that in the beginning of your training session, you do perhaps have some full sugar squash or a sports energy drink. That's going to take 20 minutes to get into your system. So you need that at the beginning of the session or on the way to the session, but optimally you're using whole food and doing that beforehand. The alternative is that you've eaten enough since your previous training session to have enough glucose and glycogen available for that morning training session. It's hard enough to get, and then I've got another question about supplements. With iron, it is the case that some women do need to take an iron supplement because they're not getting enough from their diet. It's possible to get enough iron from your diet, but if you're dropping below that, a supplement might be necessary. What I would say though is, apart from vitamin D, where there is a Public Health England recommendation that everyone supplements with vitamin D, you shouldn't really take supplements unless you know your levels, because we can cause toxicity. It's not a case of just because some's good, more's even better. So what I would recommend, if you think you might be iron deficient, is go to your doctor, tell them that you're feeling, your GP, tell them you're feeling fatigued, could you have an iron test? And then you can take the appropriate amount of iron supplement. Do you have any advice for cutting weight? So I've been asked if there's any advice about cutting weight without impacting performance. These are things I would definitely talk about in team specific, in team talks where weight is especially in the weight category sports, we'll be going into great detail about healthy ways to cut weight to make competition weight. Again, it would all depend on how much you have to lose. My general guidance would to be not looking to lose that weight too fast, keeping training fueled, because optimally you're using your training sessions to improve your performance. You're not using your training sessions for weight loss or fat loss. So in general, what I would recommend is that you still keep training sessions fueled and then go into about a 500 calorie deficit over the rest of the day. But as I say, in team talks, I will talk about that in more detail. Sorry that I've run over a bit. And sorry, another question. Again, creatine, I think that says creatine. It's not banned in the UK. The guidance, so this will have to be the last question, because I do have another talk starting in 5 minutes. But as I say, there'll be lots of time in your, or if you want to contact me directly, I'm quite happy for you to do that if I haven't, if you do have a specific question. So creatine is a sports supplement, and the one that I spoke about at the beginning, and it might be vegans in explosive type sports might want to consider supplementing with it. Some research says it's okay to take over the longer term. My guidance is that you cycle it, so that you take creatine for 3 months, then you have a break. So therefore it means timing when you are taking creatine for competition times or those phases of training where you are going to be taking more sport. With any supplements, they should be informed sport batch coded, so that you're doing all you can to reduce the risk of also having a contaminated supplement. So I hope that's been useful for you all, and this information forms the base of your team talks, so that we then can spend more time on other things during those and don't have to rush through this as well. As I say, I hope you found that useful, and you start implementing that information in your training and competition.
Thank you.